All right, let's talk about flesh versus discipline. So this morning I was talking with my kids and we were talking about, living in the flesh, being compelled in the flesh, compelled to distract, compelled to, control the way that you feel through pleasurable activities or eating certain foods, etc. But we started to talk about, and also the compulsion to engage in behaviors that you think are going to protect you but are actually destroying your life. We started to talk about addiction because the conversation kind of went into the role of understanding your feelings and being in contact with your feelings in order to know what you need to examine, to know how to change, to have the information in a given moment as to how you need to respond. And I was thinking about the years that I spent in 12 steps and how I had relapsed at one point after having many years of sobriety. Let me be clear, sobriety is not healing. It's just not drinking. That's all it is. It's not healing. It's also not healing if you still think you have a quote-unquote disease. You're not healing. You still got to go to meetings to talk about it. Not healing. That's not what God has set you apart to do, okay? I thought that it was important for many years, but obviously I didn't heal if after many years of sobriety I had relapsed. And I remember that I had been going to therapy, I had gone to 12 steps. One thing I had learned was how to identify feelings, but I hadn't learned how to use them for information. I hadn't learned how to use them in order to understand what God is raising in me for me to address. I hadn't learned any of that. Nothing useful. Just, identify your feelings. I'm feeling sad, mad. A lot of good that does ya. Am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Just a bunch of boxes to be checked. Not like I feel this way because God is trying to raise something inside of me for me to address. Nothing ever changes, And unfortunately, you just get used to like a lot of people dying after great, periods of sobriety, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of sobriety, and then the person relapses and they die. I got very desensitized to death from addiction. Like, that's not a good thing, It's not a good thing. One of the things that I was sharing with the kids is that I had been through this like long period of sobriety and I have relapsed. And I remember that after that relapse that I did not have any ability to distinguish my feelings. It was just I was a big ball of emotion and overwhelm. I couldn't tell you what I was feeling in a given moment because what I had been doing, and this is what you do when you're a quote unquote addict, right? You just live according to the flesh. Like, you have this feeling and you're like, I feel like a cigarette. I feel like I need a cigarette. That's what you say. And then you smoke a cigarette and the nicotine satisfies your flesh and you're like, okay, I'm good for a little while. And then a little while later, you're like, I need a cigarette. And it's the same thing with alcohol and it's the same thing with drugs. And you know what? It's the same thing with all flesh behavior. That you just keep feeding that flesh. I need this. I want this. I need to distract. You're not even aware of like how you feel. You just automatically punch in that social media page or click on that social media page. You grab your phone, you start scrolling, and you look at people who live this way. You don't have to be a drug addict. You don't have to be an alcoholic, or what the world calls drug addict and alcoholic. You don't have to be that in order to see that people who live that way are dead. There's nothing in their eyes. The lamp of the body. It's just a person who has a temptation. It turns into a compulsion, must gratify the flesh, will compromise everything, health, salvation, to gratify the flesh. That's it. That's flesh-based living. And it's what most people are doing. And you might think, oh, that's so disgusting when you talk about the drug addicts, when you talk about those people. Is it different? Are you different, really? How? How are you different? Especially those of you who refuse to come out of your counterfeit Christian, so-called Christian churches. You do the same thing. Like, you're compelled to speak this counterfeit Christian language, to justify yourselves, to go to your, little coffee gatherings. You get all hyped up on coffee and call that spiritual. You're living by your flesh all the time. And you're supposed to know better. Don't you know that those who sin with knowledge are going to receive the larger lashing? Why can't you stop the things that you do? And don't say that you can, because even Paul said he did the very things he did not want to do. So we're all in the same situation. Some just look different. And the thing is that this issue of being attuned to ourselves and knowing what God is raising in us at any given moment through our feelings, our dreams, our circumstances, our afflictions, being attuned to that is vital. It's critical to being in step with God and to being in your covenant with God. Because if you're not acknowledging those things, you don't hear him. If you can't even hear yourself, how are you going to tell me that you hear him? If you're not hearing yourself, how are you examining yourself? You aren't able to hear the way that God is speaking to you through the design he gave you. And so many of you wonder why you have this cesspool of emotion that you call depression and anxiety. You wonder why it is that you feel that way, why it's overwhelming you, rather than identifying your feelings so that you can actually deal with what God is raising in you. No, just overwhelm and flesh freak out. I feel like this, I go do that, I gratify the flesh. Oh, I just don't feel any gratification, no satiation. Let me find something else that I can stuff in my flesh. The opposite of this is discipline. But you can't just check a box to become disciplined. You actually have to heal in order to get a hold of these behaviors. You don't have a disease. You don't have a syndrome or a diagnosis. That's not what's going on. You're undisciplined and you live according to the flesh. And so you experience the consequences that God sends to those who live according to the flesh, to those who are uncircumcised. The opposite of flesh-based living is discipline, clarity, prudence, peace. Kind of sounds like God's spirit, doesn't it? Well, yeah. Because when you're living in the heart and spirit and you're in your covenant, then God's spirit occupies you. So what is happening to you when you're living according to the flesh is that you are occupied by different spirits. And those spirits are going to compel you to behave in ways that are outside of your integrity. Another example of this that my daughter was talking about had to do with, doing the work, journaling. So for those of you who've been doing the work, but then at the back of your mind, you're somewhere else. And then you get done without even thinking. Your programming is to type in that social media page or whatever you've been distracting yourself with. Click on some social media account. We're programmed for our flesh. And science tells us that it's good to live in the flesh, the mind and body. That's good. That's actually powerful. The power of the mind and body. And yet Jesus says, the flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing. The spirit that God gave you, that he put in you, not his spirit, obviously his spirit is willing to do the things of God. The spirit he gave you is willing to do the things of God. God is spirit, so he's going to communicate with your spirit. That's what Jesus told us is powerful, is strong, is able to do the things of God. He said the flesh is weak. And Paul defined the flesh for us, the physical flesh. The mind and body. You once lived in the passions of your mind and body, where there's a desire for sin that you're supposed to be circumcised from. Who are you listening to, guys? Are you listening to people in counterfeit churches and sermons and ministries that talk in this language? That talk about the power of the mind and body, your cognitions, changing your thinking? Because I have seen it on your YouTube pages that this is what you're subscribed to, that this is what you're sharing with the rest of the world. You create playlists of these kinds of teachings, and then you expect God to heal you? You expect that you're not going to have these diagnoses anymore? No, you actually have accepted that you have these diagnoses because you can just abdicate power and accountability over to some doctor. This isn't what God established for us. This is flesh-based living. It is the opposite of your covenant. Your covenant states that you are supposed to be circumcised from your sinful desires, your sinful flesh, and disciplined in your physical flesh. And some of you aren't even doing that with my videos. Like, you have no discipline around my videos. That does not please me. Instead of going and sitting with God and applying the teachings that I am speaking to you, you tune out yet again and just listen to what I say as though I sing a song well or play an instrument well, but you don't apply it. And you claim you're saved. And this is your flesh-based living, and you are no different from an addict, from what the world is calling an addict. You live according to your flesh. You gratify and distract, and you don't sit with God. You claim you're a new creation, but nothing has changed in you. How are you a new creation? Because someone told you when you popped out of water that you were? Shallow, superficial teachings? Did you feel like a different creation? Have you stopped sinning deliberately? Tell me about being a new creation. What does that mean to you? You're dead. If this is the way you're living, you're dead. You've not crossed over to life. You're dead. There needs to be a difference in the way that you're living. You need to be changing. Your mind and body need to be disciplined, not the place you're living. And you need to be hearing from God. And if that's not happening, you need to do a fast. There's an entire playlist on this channel on fasting. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. You could probably listen to a couple of those videos. It's a lot of repetition of information. You need to remove all the idols in your life, all the distractions, and return to God single-mindedly. Please discern this with Him.